Tech Frog here. Today's short Battletech story is going to be a little bit more raw and unpolished. I hope you can indulge me, as everything has a purpose. I was sitting at my desk in my classroom today thinking about how much of what we perceive in the lives of others has become curated and polished to the point of unhealthy absurdity. We all have that friend on social media, though friend may be a loosely applied term, who seems to have it all. In between perfect baby pictures, tropical vacations, and a partner who seems like they have it all, it's easy to fall into those feelings of jealousy and regret over actions you could have taken to make your life a little more perfect. It's easy to forget that we're getting the Disney-fied version of the lives of others. People tend not to post their embarrassing or shameful moments. You don't get to see the pictures of the blowout arguments with their spouses where you say something you cannot take back. It's something to think about as we live more and more of our lives online, where we have a profound level of control how the world sees us. This audio will be raw. I'm not going to stop recording and go back anytime I flub over a word or pause to decipher my own handwriting. You might even hear the turning of a page as the story was frantically handwritten into a notebook. Take the opportunity to appreciate a much more real storytelling experience. It'll be mostly painless, I promise. Today's story takes place on a nondescript backwater world on the edge of House Lau-controlled space. Our characters are born, lived, fight, and die, never receiving a mention by historians or chroniclers before now. In fact, most will still go unnamed when this is over, not for cold or callous disregard by the author, but because those names are lost to the sands of time. Bright flashes lit up the skyline like a macabre fireworks show. However, instead of receiving cheers and applause, the citizens of the city cowered and prayed. Lieutenant Marshal Dempsey watched his console rather than the surrounding explosions, because the most important number in his universe was rapidly counting down to 0. Once it reached that number, Marshal knew he was likely to die. The 2 rotary machine guns temporarily mounted onto his Battletech's shoulders were thudding the entire machine, spewing thousands of rounds of ammunition into the sky in the desperate hope that they would obliterate the incoming long-range missiles that seemed to stream down endlessly on Marshall's position. 1,500 rounds in the hopper. 1,300. 1,175. Marshall couldn't take his eyes off that number. He squeezed his gloved hands into the mech's command chair armrests while slowly compiling a list of curse words he would direct at the next Lao battlemech he sees. That is, if he ever does see another battlemech. 980. 735. It wouldn't be long now. Less than a minute at this rate. A flashing light on the console warned Marshall of incoming debris, and moments later the Phoenix Hawk was pelted with ferrocrete from the building above. Thankfully, the damage was just cosmetic. 327. 152. 0. 0. The guns fell silent on Marshall's mech. Protective umbrella fire from the city's battlemechs started to fade, and as each gun fell silent, the incoming missiles began to impact structures and streets. Some of these missiles exploded and burst like a balloon, spraying volatile liquids and magnesium strips that ignited and burned in the air. People unlucky enough to be caught out in those blasts were incinerated quickly, or left with horrifying burns that were guaranteed to maim and require years of medical care. The city started to burn. Marshall felt trapped by the curtain of fire, and in every way he was. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of silence, the command channel burst to life. The imposing voice of Captain Risa felt like distilled relief. She said, "Get your asses moving. I want you out of that Quadrant B, defenders. Use your cover and move out into the outskirts. We have an opportunity to catch some of the Lao artillery off guard. You want a chance to hit back? Here it is." Marshall pushed forward on his sticks, and the Phoenix Hawk lurched into action. The 45-ton battlemech stepped from the base of the building, over rubble, and out onto the wide thoroughfare. Clear of the debris, Marshall began to run. Other Defense Force units were rolling out of parking garages and shelters, but he blew by all of them in his rush for revenge. The missiles were still incoming, but he didn't care. Every step took him closer to ending the attack on his city, and that was all that mattered. A missile impacted his mech's arm, but the battlemech's armor shrugged it off. As he entered the outskirts, the incoming fire became sparse. the smoke and fires fewer and farther in between. Marshall could see flashes and fire in the distance, mix in with the statuesque oak trees the region was known for growing. Adrenaline pumped through Marshall's body as he triggered the Phoenix Hawk's jump jets, sending the massive humanoid mech soaring through the sky. It must have been quite the spectacle, as there was very little incoming fire from his destination. The speed of the Phoenix Hawk paid off, and the Lao infantry in light armor tasked with protecting the right flank of the 63rd Artillery Battalion was not prepared to see the 45-ton battle mech soaring toward them. Those who saw it coming were slow to react. Those who didn't see it coming were startled by the pop of laser fire cooking off the moisture in the air between the Phoenix Hawk and its targets. An APC shuddered under the intensity of the large laser's impact, all 8 of its tires exploding as the synthetic rubber was incinerated. The armor fared much better, however the several open hatches exposed the driver and gunner to the heat wave. Mercifully, it was a quick death. More laser fire raked the foxholes, filled with Lao infantry, as the Phoenix Hawk landed with a thud in amongst the oak trees. The soldier lined up a shot with the portable SRM, but as soon as the mech landed, it was off running again. The missile streaked between the mech's legs and impacted in the branches of a tree, blowing the top half of it. Marshall's mech flooded with warm air as he pushed his mech through the defensive line. He lined up shots on vehicles and strafed groups of soldiers where he could, however these weren't his real targets. His targets were the staggered line of LRM carriers still firing missiles into the city. Marshall raised his mech's right arm and took aim at one of the large tanks in the middle. In his righteous fury he screamed as he fired, the alpha strike of large and medium lasers tearing through the armor like hot steel through flesh. The LRM carrier's chassis buckled, stopped firing, then exploded with a shockwave that knocked down every soldier within 100 meters. The ammo carrier next to the tank was awash in flame, and it too exploded, creating a secondary blast that added to the carnage of the first. Marshall had little time to savor the destruction, as concentrated fire from infantry and light vehicles he had passed was starting to register damage on his mech. He twisted, knelt the mech down, and counted 3 long seconds in order to give the mech a chance to bleed off the heat he had generated. 1, 2, 3. He was off again, lining up his next shot on the now retreating LRM carriers. The 4 remaining tanks were pulling back into the denser forest, presumably for the safety of the mainline Lao protectors. Marshall targeted the second LRM carrier and fired his large laser. The shot was low, mostly hitting the dirt behind the moving vehicle. However, enough of the high-energy beam hit the tracks that it melted them into slag. The tank lurched to the left and then came to a stop. Marshall briefly considered just moving on. However, this last thing he wanted was for a repair crew to salvage it. He aimed at the tank and sent 2 more medium laser shots into the turret of the now stationary tank. The remaining ammo in the turret cooked off, lighting up the night with another new fireball. Every passing second brought more fire Marshall's way. An infantry squad PPC crackled across his mech's left leg before he could spot it, and raked the position with fire. Cautionary lights on his console started to flash orange as the minor damage stacked up. On the move again, Marshall was now passing by giant oak trees that had rivaled his mech in height. He kept focus on the tracks of the 3rd LRM carrier, hoping to bring it down quickly. Marshall closed quickly, able to fire on that tank as it had tried to twist and turn around the trees. A large laser cut across the rear hull, cutting deep into it and ending the tank's escape. The vehicle crumbled in on itself, going silent and still. Any feeling of victory was short-lived, as the trees in front of the destroyed tank shuddered and then broke as the approaching Lao battle mech waved them aside. Marshall was quick to react, but the mech was a larger thunderbolt painted bright green, and it was already barreling down on him. The 2 mechs crashed together, and momentum brought the thunderbolt down on top of the Phoenix Hawk. Marshall was only kept from tumbling around the cockpit by his 5-point harness. However, even then he hit his helmeted head hard against the hard headrest, which broke from the impact. Through the stars, he clung to the controls, trying to shove the thunderbolt off of him. The reckless Lao mech warrior's mech was now entangled with Marshall's Phoenix Hawk. The mechs struggled, trying to find purchase to get away from the other while triggering short-range shots from torso-mounted guns. The litany of warning buzzers and lights on Marshall's mech was growing by the second as the armor panels were scraped and blown apart. Triggering his own lasers, Marshall attempted to give as good as he got. However, he was out-armored and outgunned. The Phoenix Hawk shuddered and was pulled to the left as the Lao Mech Warrior's mech was able to grab onto his left arm. Marshall was tossed against restraints again. Armor cables tore, armor cracked, and finally the shoulder joint itself came loose from the Phoenix Hawk as the thunderbolt ripped it from the prone mech. The limb was still in the thunderbolt's hand as the mech stood. Marshall sidestepped his mech, seeking to put some space between it and the heavier design. His world focused on the thunderbolt as it turned to line up a shot. The only chance Marshall would have is if he was able to predict the exact moment the thunderbolt's mech warrior would fire. When he saw the arm rise and its feet plant, Marshall pushed his control sticks forward and triggered his jump jets. The Phoenix Hawk started a run that became a bound up into the air. The thunderbolt's shots either missed or peppered the legs of the Phoenix Hawk. Marshall struggled to keep the mech on its original trajectory, which carried it just over the head of the Lao mech. If he had planned it, it never would have worked. The damage the Phoenix Hawk took pushed the mech further forward than up. This resulted in the right foot smacking into the Thunderbolt's shoulder LRM launcher. The missiles in the rack exploded, ripping a large gash in the Thunderbolt's torso. Marshall's mech tumbled out of control to the ground, and the Thunderbolt collapsed to a knee. Marshall woke up, dangling forward in his command chair. Sparks and broken panels surrounded him. His blurred vision and aching skull suggested that he had at least a concussion. The Phoenix Hawk's power seemed to be fluctuating between off and out of control. There would be a flash of lights, warning buttons, buzzers, then darkness as the system shut down and tried to reboot its way out of its cascade of failing systems. The only info Marshall had, for sure, concerning the outside world was that anyone out there either wanted him alive or hadn't gotten around to killing him yet. Marshall tugged on his harness, checking his surroundings, and listened for outside noise. He knew that your average house-loyal soldier wouldn't be inclined to take a live prisoner after Marshall's rampage through their lines. Then again, that might be preferable to spending time with an interrogator who wouldn't take a name and serial number as an answer. Through blurred vision, Marshall braced his leg against the damaged console and pulled the clasp on his harness. He did fall forward, but was able to catch himself. At least, at this angle, the rear hatch would be accessible. With the emergency backpack and a needler pistol in his hand, Marshall opened the hatch. The light that flooded into the cockpit was dim and partially obscured by smoke in the air that smelled like burning myomer cable and spent explosives. When Marshall climbed out, he was greeted by a forest that had been reduced to smoldering ash and plumes of black smoke. The Phoenix Hawk was a mangled mess. Most of the upper torso was gouged into the dirt, and almost all of the head was buried. Perhaps this explained why Marshall was still alive. There was widespread damage, and Marshall's heart ached at the prospect of months' worth of repair at the cost of hundreds of thousands of sea-bills. He ever want to pilot his mech again. When it was his father's mech, Marshall remembered hearing him say that the Phoenix Hawk was the embodiment of Vitruvius's belief that constructs should be beautiful, stable, and useful. Marshall never looked into who this Vitruvius was, but he must have been a pretty solid judge of battle mechs. This is the end of part 1. Thank you for listening. I appreciate the support. As always, if you have comments, drop them in the comment section below. I love to get input on what you like, what you don't like, and it lets me know what I should be working on in the future. Take care, be awesome, and try to make the world a slightly better place today and tomorrow.